Year 1941. As the world collapses under the thunder of bombs and nations bleed over a few kilometers of land, a man inside a hangar in California has a vision his colleagues dismiss as a psychotic delusion. His name is Jack Northrup. In an era when giants like Boeing or Douglas pour their resources into massive fuselages and enormous tails, Northrup defends a radical theory. The tail of an aircraft is a parasite. He claims the vertical stabilizer is an unnecessary brake that wastes fuel, creates drag, and reveals the machine's position to the enemy. His dream is absolute purity, an airplane that is simply a wing, no central fuselage, nothing that cuts through the air inefficiently. Welcome to the story of the Northrop YB-49, a machine that looks as if it travelled back in time from the future to the 1940s, a gigantic aluminum wing that was meant to become the first nuclear bomber capable of crossing the planet, but instead became one of the greatest tragedies and conspiracies in the history of world aviation. To understand why the Pentagon invested millions in a giant boomerang, you have to understand the panic of 1942. After Pearl Harbor, the United States feared Britain might collapse. If London fell, Americans would have no bases in Europe. They would have to bomb Germany from their own shores in New York, crossing the entire Atlantic and returning non-stop. It was an impossible mission for the technology of the time. They needed a bomber with a range of 16,000 kilometers. Northrop presented his flying wing. It was such a radical design that the generals didn't know how to look at it. A pure wing with a 52-meter wingspan. By eliminating the fuselage, weight was drastically reduced and air resistance was almost non-existent. It could fly farther and carry more bombs than any B-17. It was the ultimate weapon, but it was technology the world of 1940 was not physically ready to control. The project began with propeller engines, but the vibrations were unbearable. Northrop then decided to leap into the future and installed 8 Allison J-35 jet engines. Thus, the YB-49 was born. When the first prototype rolled out of the hangar in 1947, there was total silence. It didn't look like an airplane, it looked like an elongated flying saucer. At the time, UFO sightings were at their peak in the United States, and today we know that many reports of triangular objects in California were actually terrified civilians seeing the YB-49 during secret tests. But beneath its space-age appearance lurked an untamable beast. Without a tail, the aircraft was aerodynamically unstable. If the nose pitched up too much, airflow would break down, and the plane would enter a flat spin from which it was impossible to recover. Northrop had designed an airplane that needed a computer to fly, but microprocessors did not yet exist. This is where the story turns to morning. On June 5, 1948, Captain Glen Edwards, one of the best test pilots in the world, took off over the Mojave Desert. During the flight, the giant wing began to oscillate violently. Without vertical stabilizers, the aircraft entered a resonance phenomenon the metal could not withstand. The YB-49 literally broke apart in midair under inhuman G-forces. It crashed into the desert, killing Edwards and his entire crew. The impact was so significant that the military renamed Muroc Air Base as Edwards Air Force Base. NASA's most famous base today bears the name of the man who died trying to tame Northrop's ghost. Despite the tragedy, the second prototype proved harder to detect by radar than its rival, the Convair B-36. However, a betrayal was brewing in Washington. The Secretary of the Air Force, Stuart Symington, ordered the project abruptly cancelled. What he did next is a historical crime. He ordered all completed prototypes to be dragged onto the runway and burned in front of the engineers. Jack Northrop watched from his office as his fleet of flying wings was reduced to smoking ashes. It is said to have been political corruption, an attempt to force Northrop into merging with other companies. That day, the United States destroyed technology that would have given it radar invisibility 40 years ahead of its time. To understand the YB-49's technical feat, we must look at its skin. In an era of crude rivets, Northrop used high-strength aluminum alloys that required special heat treatment. Each wing section had to withstand massive torsional stresses that, in a conventional aircraft, are distributed toward the tail. With no fuselage, fuel tanks, bomb bay, and crew cabin, all had to be integrated within the thickness of the wing. This forced the design of an extremely thick wing profile at the center, and razor-thin tips, an engineering feat that challenged the wind tunnels of the time. Northrop engineers spent entire nights calculating centers of gravity by hand, as the slightest loading error could render the aircraft uncontrollable. Pilots who flew the YB-49 described the experience as unreal. With no long nose in front of them as a visual reference, they felt as if they were floating on a balcony over the abyss. Yaw control was achieved through air brakes at the wingtips that opened like clamshells. It was a clever but crude system. During turns, the wing tended to slip sideways, forcing the pilot into a constant battle with the pedals. It was an aircraft that demanded absolute attention. A single second of distraction could lead to asymmetric lift loss. Despite this, when the plane found its cruising speed, it became the most efficient object ever to cross the skies, gliding with minimal drag that made any competing bomber look obsolete. Jack Northrop was not just a businessman, he was a purist of form. His obsession with the flying wing dated back to the 1920s. He believed nature makes no mistakes, and that birds are, in essence, living wings. This almost mystical vision led him to repeatedly clash with military high command, which preferred robust, predictable designs. Northrop spent much of his personal fortune on small-scale prototypes, such as the N-1M, to prove his theory worked. When the government finally burned his airplanes in 1949, they didn't just destroy metal, they destroyed the spirit of a man convinced he had cracked the secret code of efficient flight. Contemporary accounts say Northrop was pressured to merge his company with Convair, a move driven by political interests within the Department of Defense. By refusing to surrender his independence and creative control, Symington punished Northrop by cancelling his most lucrative contract. It was a power game in which technological progress was sacrificed on the altar of corporatism. For years, Jack Northrop withdrew from aviation, devastated to see his invention treated as scrap. Yet his design hid a secret even he did not fully understand at the time. The flying wing's cross-section produced a radar signature so small that it was technically the first stealth aircraft in history. Decades passed, and Northrop's name faded into history books until the computer age arrived. In the 1970s, the Air Force was searching for a radar-invisible aircraft. Engineers realized Jack Northrop's shape was the best way to evade detection waves. Thanks to fly-by-wire systems, computers could now perform the thousands of micro-adjustments per second required to keep a flying wing stable. Northrop's dream was no longer a death trap. It was the future of modern warfare. This is the final closure. In 1980, Jack Northrop was gravely ill and blind. In an act of redemption, the Pentagon allowed him to experience the model of the new secret bomber, the B-2 Spirit. Since Northrop could not see, he traced the model with his hands. When he felt that it had no tail, that it was his perfect flying wing, the old man began to cry. He said, "Now I know why God has kept me alive all these years." The design that was despised and burned in 1949 is today the backbone of United States defense. Jack Northrop died shortly after, knowing his madness had changed the world forever. Today, the B-21 Raider continues that lineage. Every time a flying wing crosses the sky, it is the ghost of the YB-49 that flies. It is a lesson in how the vision of a single man can triumph over bureaucracy, corruption, and time. The flying wing was not a failure, it was a prophecy that took 40 years to be fulfilled. The YB-49 also faced unique thermal challenges. With 8 J-35 engines embedded in the structure, the heat generated was immense. Engineers had to design complex internal ventilation channels to prevent the JP-1 fuel stored in the wings from reaching dangerous temperatures. The trailing edge of the wing incorporated small vertical fins, nicknamed fences, in an attempt to provide some directional stability, but they were rudimentary solutions compared to modern control software. Every test flight was a dance with death, where data was collected with film cameras and handwritten notes, long before digital telemetry existed. The story of the YB-49 is also the story of Edwards Air Force Base. Before becoming the nerve center of X-planes and the space shuttle, Muroc was just a desolate dry lake bed. It was the YB-49 that put this base on the global aviation map. Edwards's tragedy was not in vain. From its wreckage emerged the rigor in flight testing that defined the golden age of American aviation. Pilots who fly the B-2 Spirit today know this story well. They know they carry the legacy of a man who was humiliated for telling the truth too early. When the sun sets over the Mojave Desert, one can still imagine the silhouette of the flying wing cut against the sky. It was an object of terrifying beauty, an arrow launched toward the future that bounced back against the limits of its time. Jack Northrop did not just design an airplane, he designed a way of thinking. He understood that air is a fluid that does not forgive inefficiency, and that in the pursuit of speed and range, less is always more. His life ended in silence, but his work roars every time a stealth bomber takes off on a long-range mission. It is, quite possibly, the slowest and most perfect technological revenge of all time.